I remember the exact weight of the dark. Not the dark itself. I have been in dark places before. Tunnels and trenches and rooms where the power went out for reasons far less calculated than what happened on Vareth 9. I mean the weight of it. The way it pressed down on that corridor like something alive, like it had intention, like someone had bottled absence and cracked it open at exactly the right moment to kill someone I had decided, somewhere without words, I was not going to let die. But I am getting ahead of myself. They always tell you to start at the beginning. The problem is, I am not entirely sure where the beginning is. Maybe it starts with Ambassador Vayleth. Maybe it starts with me. Maybe it starts the first time she looked at me, really looked, with all four of those forward-facing compound eyes, and said something in her own language that her translator rendered as, "You are worried about something you cannot name yet." And she was right. I just did not know what I was worried about until the lights went out. I was not officially assigned to her protection. I want that clear. My name was not on the rotation. I had no formal contract covering what I did on Vareth 9, which is part of why the debrief was so uncomfortable for so many people sitting across that table from me. Officially, I was a human liaison attached to the Conclave Diplomatic Convoy, a title that mostly meant I answered questions about human customs, explained why we eat at irregular intervals, and stood in the background during formal functions looking like I belonged there. Unofficially, I stayed close to Vayleth, not because I was ordered to, because somewhere in the 3 months I had spent around her, I had developed the kind of quiet certainty that does not announce itself. She mattered. Not in the political sense, though that was also true. She had done more for humanity's standing in the conclave than any formal treaty had managed. She had stood on that floor and said, in front of species who had debated our worthiness for years, that humans deserved trust. That was not nothing. That was not a small thing to do. But it was more personal than politics. She had learned our language, not the formal version, the real one. She made jokes that landed. She remembered things. She asked me once about a place called Montana, because she had read about mountains and wanted to understand why humans found them beautiful when they served no practical purpose. I told her that some things do not need a practical purpose. She considered this for a long time, and then said it was either the most profound or most foolish thing she had ever heard, and she had not yet decided which. I liked her. That is the simplest version of it. I liked her, and so I stayed close. And so when everything failed, I was there. Vareth 9 was, I suppose, though stations do not change much, a resupply point at the edge of recognized conclave space. It had been neutral ground for long enough that neutral had started to feel permanent. Nobody brought weapons to Vareth 9 except the security details, and even those were mostly ceremonial at diplomatic functions. The threat assessment was low, routine. The kind of assignment where experienced security personnel start to relax in ways they should not. I was not experienced security personnel. I was just a person who paid attention. Osevex had made it clear, more than once, that he did not value my attention. He was the Dravathi security chief on the convoy. Tall, precise, and deeply committed to the idea that security was a science, and therefore had no room for the kind of vague, unquantifiable unease that humans apparently carried around like luggage. He had reviewed my background. He had noted the absence of formal tactical training. He had, in a meeting I was technically not supposed to know about, described human involvement in the protection detail as sentimental rather than strategic. I did not take it personally, mostly because he was not entirely wrong. What I had was not strategy. It was something harder to put in a report. I noticed things. The Dravathi technician on the maintenance deck blinked wrong. That sounds absurd, I know, but Dravathi have a specific blink pattern, slow, lateral, controlled. And this one was fast and vertical, and slightly off rhythm, in the way that happens when someone is performing calm, rather than feeling it. I noticed the maintenance cycle had run 4 minutes early that evening, which meant someone had accessed the schedule. I noticed a smell on the lower corridor near Vayleth's quarters, something metallic and organic that did not belong on a resupply deck that should have smelled like filtered air and machine lubricant. I had no formal channel for any of this. There was no box to check that said, "Something feels wrong in a way I cannot fully articulate," so I did the only thing available to me. I stayed close. I stopped sleeping in my assigned quarters. and started sleeping in a chair outside her section. I told myself it was precautionary. I told myself I was probably overreacting. At 0312 station time, I stopped telling myself anything. The lights did not flicker. They did not fade. They went out the way a door closes, decisively, completely, with clear intention, and in the half-second before they died, I was already moving. I do not know how to explain that in a way that satisfies people who need causes to precede effects. My hand found Vaylith's secondary arm in the dark before my conscious mind had finished processing that the dark existed. I pulled her low and to the left, toward the wall, pressing her considerable frame against the corridor plating, and positioning myself between her and the open space behind us. She made a sound I had not heard from her before. Not fear exactly. Sithori do not vocalize fear the way we do. It was more like a frequency shift, something that sat at the edge of hearing and communicated a deep biological alarm. I felt it more than heard it. I kept my hand on her arm and said, very quietly, "Stay still." She stayed still. Around us, the corridor was breaking apart with noise. The Sithori guards were shouting in their own language. Their chemical pulse weapons useless, because those weapons need a targeting lock, and a targeting lock needs light. The Dravathi security grid was rerouting through backup systems, which takes 11 seconds under ideal conditions, and longer when someone has specifically designed the blackout to interfere with the rerouting process. Osavex was on comms that were not working, projecting coordinates in a voice that was professionally controlled and entirely unable to help. I could not see anything. I want to be clear about that. I am not going to tell you I have some enhanced human night vision, or that my eyes adjusted in time to matter. They did not. I was operating entirely on the information I had gathered before the lights went out. The layout of the corridor, the distance to the nearest junction, the position of the bodies around me, the direction the smell had been strongest. The smell told me which direction to pay attention to. I heard movement before I heard anything else. Careful movement, the kind that belongs to someone who has practiced being quiet. It was coming from my left and slightly forward, which meant it was coming from the direction of the maintenance junction, which meant I had been right about the technician and the schedule and the smell, and none of that information was useful anymore, except to confirm that something was coming, and I was the only thing between it and Vaylith. 2 shots. The weapon was something quiet, suppressed or naturally low acoustic, designed for exactly this kind of dark and silent work. The first shot hit the wall above us. The second hit me. Left side, below the shoulder, angled. It caught the edge of something important, but not important enough to stop me, which I think surprised the shooter more than it surprised me. I have found that pain operates on a delay when the situation has not yet resolved. My body files it for later. In the moment, it registered as impact and pressure, and then nothing, because there was still something to do. I did not have a weapon ready. I had not cleared one in time. What I had was position and momentum, and the complete willingness to use both without hesitation, which turned out to be enough. I moved toward the sound rather than away from it, which is not the instinct most people expect, but is the one that closes distance before a second shot can be properly aimed. 11 seconds from first contact to the point where the shooter was no longer capable of shooting. I counted them. I always count. It helps me stay inside the moment rather than ahead of it or behind it. Then the lights came back. Vaylith was against the wall exactly where I had left her. All 8 of her limbs were drawn inward, pressed close to her body. The Sithori posture of acute shock, a prey animal reflex left over from a time before her species built cities and negotiated treaties. She was unharmed. I checked before I checked myself. That is also protocol, though in this case it was not really about protocol. I was bleeding onto the deck, not dramatically, not the kind of bleeding that ends things, but consistently, and with a color that I remember finding slightly surprising against the gray floor. I cataloged the threats in the corridor. I checked the junction. I confirmed the shooter was contained. I did all of this before I acknowledged the blood, because the room comes first. That is not heroism. That is just the order in which things need to happen. Vaylith uncurled slowly. It took a moment. Sithori come back from shock at their own pace, and there is no rushing it. Then she turned all 4 of her forward-facing eyes toward me, and she was very still in a different way than before. Not paralyzed, but deliberate. present. She spoke in Sathori first. Then she shifted to my language, precisely and carefully, because she knew I would receive it differently that way. She knew that about me. She said, "You put yourself between me and the dark." I told her it was the job. She told me she had read my contract and that it was not, in fact, the job. I did not have a sophisticated response to that. I told her it was just me. Then, she looked at me for a long time with those enormous compound eyes that can process light across spectrums I cannot access, eyes that had seen more of the galaxy than I had, and she said nothing else. She did not need to. Osavex arrived 40 seconds later with a full tactical team. 40 seconds. In the context of what had already happened, 40 seconds was a very long time. He processed the scene efficiently, which is what Dravathi do. He noted the shooter's position, and the evidence of my involvement, and the blood on the deck, and Valeth's undamaged presence, and he put it all together, the way a very precise mind puts things together, which is correctly, but without quite capturing what it felt like from the inside. His report described my actions as falling within acceptable parameters during a system failure. I heard this in debrief, and I sat with it, and I decided not to say anything, because arguing about the language in a report is exactly the kind of conversation that does not go anywhere useful. But later, not on record, in a corridor, the two of us alone, Osavex found me. He stood at a distance that felt considered rather than accidental, and he was quiet for long enough that I started to wonder if he was going to say anything at all. Then he told me that his people have a concept. It translates roughly as, the one who moves before thought. He said that for a very long time, his people had classified this as an evolutionary defect, impulsive, irrational, inconsistent with the careful architecture of a well-reasoned mind. Then he paused. Then he said, "They may have been wrong about that." He left before I could respond. I think that was intentional. Some acknowledgments are complete the moment they are spoken, and do not need anything added to them. The formal investigation identified the shooter as a contracted operative hired by a splinter faction within the Conclave, a group that had decided Valeth's advocacy for humanity was a threat to the existing order of things. The cameras in that corridor had been disabled via the same access pathway as the maintenance schedule, targeted, surgical, deliberate. Every layer of designed protection had been specifically neutralized. Every layer except one that nobody had planned for. Weeks later, Valeth returned to the conclave floor. I watched her from the side of the room, officially assigned to her detail now, my name on the rotation, my contract updated to reflect what I had apparently already been doing anyway. She moved through the space with the same openness she always had, trusting in the same uncomplicated way, speaking to delegates from species who had not always been generous to either of us. She was still saying it, still using the phrase she had picked up from humans somewhere along the way. Trust is built in the boring moments. I watched her, and I thought about 11 seconds. I thought about a hand moving in the dark before a mind makes a decision. I thought about the difference between what a contract says and what a person actually is. I thought about all the variables in that corridor, the systems, the protocols, the trained personnel, the carefully designed layers of protection, and the single point where the math had come out right. She caught me watching at one point, 4 eyes, direct. She did not say anything. She did not need to. They asked me, in the debrief, to explain what made me act without orders, without light, without certainty of outcome. I told them the truth. It was not complicated. It was not philosophical. It did not require a diagram, or a doctrine, or a body of research into human behavioral patterns under stress. No one was supposed to hurt her. That was the whole of it. That was the calculation, beginning to end. She existed, harm was approaching, I was the variable that could change the outcome. Everything else, the dark, the pain, the absence of a plan, was just the conditions inside which that single fact had to be acted upon. No one was supposed to hurt her. And so no one did.